Linda Evans, the untouchable queen of Dynasty, a living emblem of beauty, power, and absolute strength during television's golden era, once captivated the entire world with a radiance that seemed impossible to crack. To millions, she was more than an actress. She was the very definition of perfection, a woman who appeared invulnerable to harm. Yet behind the haute couture gowns, the red carpets, and the thunderous applause lay a brutal cost. A marriage where love slowly twisted into control and public betrayal, where she was forced to shrink herself piece by piece simply to survive. And now at the age of 83, Linda Evans enters the harshest chapter of her life. A chapter no script ever warned her about, where fame no longer serves as armor. This is no longer a battle with love or the media. It is a raw confrontation with her own body, where every step, every breath has become a trial. What happens when a woman once celebrated as the embodiment of perfection is forced to live with pain every single day? When the strength that once protected her becomes the very thing being tested. Today's story is not about how powerful Linda Evans once was. It is about how she endured and how she continues to stand despite it all. If Linda Evans has ever touched your heart, honor her now. Leave a comment, share this story, and witness the absolute unbreakable resilience of a Hollywood legend. Every fracture carries a memory, and for Linda Evans, pain arrived long before applause ever could. It is almost impossible to imagine that a woman who would one day hold America's gaze once whispered silent prayers to disappear, believing her absence might be safer than her existence. Born on November 18, 1942 in Hartford, Connecticut, Linda entered a household shaped by movement and expectation, raised by parents who survived through discipline and performance as professional dancers, people unafraid of lights, applause, or judgment. From the outside, their world looked artistic and alive, steady rather than wealthy, built on rehearsals, routine, and relentless motion. Inside Linda, however, fear took hold early and never loosened. She did not crave attention, she feared it. While her mother and father moved confidently across stages, she remained at the edges, a fragile only child who felt exposed by the smallest glance. She would later remember that her earliest memories were not of dreams or joy, but of panic, the tightening in her chest when eyes turned toward her, and the quiet belief that safety could only exist in silence. In 1949, when Linda was just 6 years old, her family left Hartford and relocated to North Hollywood, drawn by opportunity in a city built entirely on visibility. For her, the move did not feel like promise, it felt like exposure. In a place that celebrated image and constant comparison, her sense of not belonging deepened into something painful and unrelenting. She did not dream of being seen. She longed to vanish. Terrified of attention, struggling to speak, unable to meet another person's eyes, she carried a private burden far heavier than her years, one no one around her could fully see. As she grew older, that fear did not fade. It hardened. By the time she entered high school in the late 1950s, her classmates may have dismissed her as simply shy, but inside she was locked in a relentless, silent war against a voice that told her she was inadequate, unworthy, invisible. "I couldn't even look people in the eye. I thought the safest thing in the world was to be invisible," she would later confess, revealing how completely fear had shaped her sense of self. She remembered standing frozen when teachers called her name, her body refusing to move as heat flooded her face, and the room seemed to close in around her. In those moments, she believed something inside her was irreparably broken, and that the world would be safer, kinder, if she could simply fade away without leaving a trace. It was from within that silence, not from ambition or courage, that change first appeared. A teacher recognized the fear Linda never dared to name and guided her into drama class, not to create an actress, but to give a frightened young girl a place to face what had been closing in on her for years. The experience was brutal. Her hands shook, her voice faltered. Standing before others felt unbearable. Yet within the fragile shelter of becoming someone else, something stirred for the first time. It was not confidence, not yet, but her first breath without fear. "Acting gave me a space to feel alive, not to escape, but to finally speak," she would later reflect. That moment did not heal her overnight. It marked the beginning of a slow reclaiming. Line by line, roll by roll, Linda began to recover the voice she had once begged the world to let disappear. The stage was never about applause. It was refuge. It was survival. That fragile victory did not end her fear. It simply made retreat impossible. Linda Evans stepped forward trembling, not because fear had disappeared, but because hiding had become its own kind of suffocation. Under real lights, on unfamiliar sets, facing unblinking cameras, she was still afraid, but she was finished with vanishing. In 1959, at just 17 years old, Linda appeared in her first television commercial, a fleeting image to outsiders, but a crossing that felt enormous to her. She later remembered how unreal it was to hear her own voice fill a studio, to stand where confidence was expected from someone who still measured each breath. That brief moment did not promise success, but it ignited something fragile and irreversible, a quiet belief that she might endure this world after all. The early 1960s offered no comfort, only persistence shaped by uncertainty, and Linda pressed forward through small, easily overlooked roles in series such as Bachelor Father, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and Wagon Train, living between auditions and rejections, where money was uncertain and tomorrow never felt secure. Each role was more than a line on a resume. It was an act of survival, a refusal to retreat back into silence. And she would later reflect that she was not chasing recognition in those years, but teaching herself how to remain standing in a world that had once terrified her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, that quiet endurance began to change how others saw her, and while guest starring on The Big Valley in her early 20s, her restrained intensity caught the attention of Barbara Stanwyck, the legendary center of the series, who recognized the strength hidden beneath Linda's composure and placed her faith in her by personally recommending her for a role that would alter the course of her life. That recommendation did not offer safety, it demanded confrontation, and in 1965, Linda was cast as Audra Barkley, the youngest daughter of a powerful Western family, a role that required visibility, boldness, and emotional truth. Everything she had once believed would break her if she stepped too far into the light. Audra became a mirror she could no longer avoid, reflecting not the frightened woman she had been, but the strength she had never allowed herself to trust. Playing Audra helped me see that I was stronger than I ever believed, she would later say, as the set of The Big Valley became both refuge and trial, a place where vulnerability was unavoidable, and courage was learned the hard way, day after day, until the series concluded in 1969, and Linda Evans was no longer the woman who avoided eye contact or questioned her right to belong, but someone who understood that survival was not about being fearless. It was about standing still long enough to be seen, even when every instinct told her to hide. Sometimes success doesn't arrive as a reward, it arrives as a reckoning. When Dynasty exploded onto television screens in 1981, Linda Evans was 39 years old, an age when Hollywood quietly teaches women to prepare for disappearance. Yet instead, she was thrust into visibility so absolute it would consume her life. Stepping into Krystle Carrington was not a climb toward glory. It was the moment the world decided who she had to be every day, without rest. Krystle was serene, flawless, untouchable, the embodiment of grace inside a universe built on cruelty, wealth, and betrayal. And millions surrendered to that illusion instantly. Her weekly confrontations with the merciless Alexis Colby, portrayed by Joan Collins, were not just entertainment but rituals, events that froze living rooms across America and crowned Dynasty as a cultural force. But behind that triumph, something inside Linda began to fracture. As the series surged through the early years of the decade, acclaim closed in from every direction, growing heavier with each season. In her early 40s, when Linda accepted her Golden Globe, the applause was thunderous, yet she would later remember feeling strangely detached, standing on that stage as if watching someone else receive the honor. Recognition multiplied, covers, ceremonies, endless praise, until admiration itself became a form of confinement. She was elevated, perfected, and endlessly reproduced. her elegance frozen into an image that left no space for exhaustion or doubt. The more the world celebrated her, the smaller her private life became, until her face was everywhere, polished and untouchable, while the woman behind it slowly slipped further out of reach, disappearing inside the very success meant to define her. Fame did not confront Linda Evans with noise or spectacle. It pressed against her quietly, relentlessly, until escape became unthinkable. What viewers praised as effortless elegance demanded constant restraint, a life lived under surveillance where weakness had no permission to exist. Each day required an impossible discipline, a face that could not age, a body that could not slow, a spirit forbidden from admitting fatigue. The role she embodied did not end when cameras stopped rolling. It followed her home into mirrors and sleepless nights. Endless hours, ceaseless judgment, and the unspoken rule that perfection must never crack drained her from the inside. Some nights she returned home long after midnight, still sealed in makeup and costume, too depleted to move, sitting alone as her body finally trembled under the weight of holding herself together. Public attention fed on invented drama, but Linda's real struggle unfolded in silence. There were days I would smile on set, then go home and cry into my pillow, she confessed in 2006. Surrounded by admiration, yet untouched by comfort, exhaustion hollowed her so completely that even she could no longer tell where Krystle ended and Linda began, leaving a brutal paradox. The brighter her image burned for the world, the more invisible she became to herself. When Dynasty stood at its most powerful, Linda Evans found herself confronting a truth success could no longer drown out. Achievement no longer felt triumphant. It felt demanding, as if every honor required a silent payment from her inner life. The awards surrounding her carried weight not because they lacked worth, but because each one reminded her how far she had drifted from herself. Her thoughts returned to a younger girl in drama class who wanted nothing more than to feel real, not admired, not confined by expectations she never agreed to fulfill. I had to ask myself, am I living for the applause, or am I living for me? She later said, a question that refused to loosen its grip. In 1989, she made a decision few ever make at the height of success. Leaving Dynasty was not defeat, it was self-rescue. She stepped away without bitterness, choosing integrity over continuation. The series had not only elevated her career, it had tested her limits, her identity, and her ability to endure. And when the lights went down and the scripts ended, Linda Evans did not vanish. She emerged intact, having survived fame without surrendering herself to it. At the peak of her ascent, when the world applauded and her future seemed untouchable, Linda Evans was already stepping toward ruin, though she did not yet know it. The cruelty of what followed did not arrive as scandal or betrayal, but as something far more dangerous: devotion. Behind the glare of success and the illusion of safety, she placed her heart into hands she believed would shelter it, never suspecting they would become the place where she was slowly undone. In the late 1960s, as her career surged and hope still felt endless, Linda met John Derek, charismatic, commanding, and seasoned. 42, shaped by failed marriages and control. John Derek stood in stark contrast to Linda at 26, open-hearted, deeply romantic, and aching to belong. To Linda, this was not danger. It felt like certainty. Those early years shimmered with promise, the kind that convinces a woman that sacrifice is sacred and surrender is love. In 1968, she married believing she had found both refuge and forever, later recalling those days as radiant, when devotion felt noble, compromise felt virtuous, and love seemed powerful enough to justify the slow dismantling of herself. But devotion did not simply change. It began to consume her. What Linda once believed was protection slowly became a quiet dismantling of her identity. John discouraged her from acting not with anger, but with persuasion, framing retreat as love, insisting that her rightful place was beside him, not beneath studio lights. Afraid that choosing herself meant losing him, she complied, turning down roles, abandoning momentum, shrinking her future until her world revolved entirely around his approval. I thought giving up my career was proof of love, she later reflected. I didn't understand that I was erasing myself. Control did not arrive violently. It seeped into ordinary moments. What she wore, where she went, who she spoke to, until choice itself felt dangerous. Friends sensed the change and warned her, but Linda defended the marriage, convinced that endurance was loyalty and silence was strength. That was the moment she understood the cruel truth. She had not been broken by love, she had been erased by it. The woman audiences once adored did not disappear overnight. She was stripped away slowly, layer by layer, until one day Linda no longer recognized the voice in her own thoughts or the woman staring back from the mirror, standing in her own home, feeling like a guest inside her own life. Then in 1973, the illusion collapsed completely. John began a relationship with an 18-year-old girl, Mary Kathleen Collins, later known as Bo Derek. It was not just betrayal, it was abandonment made public, humiliation without mercy. He left with her, while Linda was left behind to absorb the wreckage alone. She did not lash out or defend herself in headlines. She endured it in silence. "It was the darkest time of my life," she later admitted. "I felt like I didn't matter, as a woman, as a person, as anything." They had no children together, and when the marriage ended in 1974, it ended quietly, without spectacle, leaving Linda to mourn not only a husband, but the identity she had surrendered, the years she had erased, and the future she had built her life around, only to watch it disappear. What followed was not recovery, it was survival. Linda walked away carrying little more than broken trust and the fragments of her identity. Nights blurred into sobbing, sleepless hours spent staring at ceilings, packing away photographs, mourning a life that would never exist. "It's like grieving someone who's still alive," she once said. "The dream dies, but you're the one left holding it." Healing came slowly and painfully through therapy, solitude, and nature. She wandered the hills of California with journals, searching for the woman she used to be. Sometimes she rewatched her own films, not out of vanity, but desperation. "I would freeze the frame," she recalled, "look into my own eyes and tell myself, she's still there." Years later, even Bo Derek would publicly express regret, acknowledging the harm caused. But the scars had already shaped Linda's spirit. Returning to audition rooms years later, doubt clung to her relentlessly. She no longer knew if she still belonged, but she showed up anyway, not for fame, but for reclamation. When Dynasty entered her life, it did not restore what was lost. It proved she had survived losing it. Linda Evans' greatest triumph was never Krystle Carrington. It was the quiet, ferocious decision to reclaim herself after love nearly erased her. What the world witnessed was not a comeback, it was a resurrection. After a love that nearly erased her, Linda Evans did not reach for passion again. She reached for silence, for safety, for a life that would not ask her to bleed to be loved again. In 1975, still carrying the quiet wreckage of her marriage to John Derek, she chose calm over fire, certainty over intensity. To Linda, that steadiness felt like oxygen. "I wanted something simple, something real," she would later say, remembering a time when peace itself felt revolutionary. Their early life together felt reassuring, almost healing. Shared routines, private laughter, the comfort of believing that love no longer had to hurt in order to be real. For a while it worked. In her early 40s, Linda allowed herself to hope again. This marriage did not demand sacrifice. It asked only for presence, and at that stage of her life, presence felt enough. Yet as the years unfolded, a quieter fracture began to form, one without blame or betrayal. Linda, now moving deeper into her 40s, remained tethered to art, emotion, and inner searching, while Stan's world followed steadier, simpler lines. Neither was wrong, neither was cruel. But slowly, unmistakably, they began to live beside each other rather than with each other. Conversations shortened, silences lengthened. The love did not explode, it thinned. Linda would later reflect that this was the most disorienting pain of all, discovering, at an age when she believed she finally understood love, that two kind people can still lose each other. By 1979, at 47, she faced the truth neither had wanted to name. Ending the marriage came not as a fight, but as an admission. No scandals followed, no headlines chased her. only the quiet grief of realizing that safety alone cannot sustain intimacy. She left the marriage with dignity intact, but with a deeper, hard-earned understanding that loneliness can exist even in peace. What followed was not despair, but reckoning. Linda did not rush to replace what she had lost. Instead, she began to ask a harder question: how do I love without abandoning myself? The end of her second marriage did not break her, it clarified her. She began to see that survival was no longer enough. She wanted resonance, truth, and emotional alignment. This realization would quietly reshape everything that came next: how she loved, how she chose, and how she defined fulfillment. The lesson was painful but profound. Even gentle love can fail, and that failure does not mean you are unworthy. It means you are still learning who you are. This was not the end of Linda Evans' search for love. It was the end of her willingness to disappear for it. And only after this quiet collapse could the true chapter of healing begin. When her second marriage finally collapsed, it did not end in noise or spectacle. It ended in exhaustion. Years of trying to remain strong inside a relationship that demanded more than it ever returned had quietly hollowed Linda Evans from within. By the time the noise of fame softened and the headlines moved on, she was no longer waiting to be rescued by love or applause. Instead, she began listening for something truer, a sense of resonance that could reach her only after the lights dimmed and the rooms grew still. What remained of that chapter in her memory felt like a season that had burned brightly, but ended before it could ever take root. Warm, fleeting, and leaving behind no ground firm enough to stand on. That was the moment she understood the cruel truth. Peace does not arrive when love stays. It arrives when you stop abandoning yourself. What followed was not loneliness, but a reckoning with herself. From that silence, something different entered Linda's life. In 1989, she met Yanni, a world-renowned Greek composer who did not love her through the gaze of the public, but through the act of listening. Their connection did not arrive as passion or spectacle. It grew in stillness, in music, in mutual respect, and in a sense of safety Linda had never realized she needed so deeply. They never married, yet the nearly 10 years they shared became, as she would later say, one of the most peaceful and grounding periods of her life. For the first time, she did not have to make herself smaller to be loved. With Yanni, I didn't feel like I had to disappear to be accepted, she once shared. I could just be. What healed her was not romance, but relief. The relief of finally being allowed to exist without cost. From there, Linda Evans began rewriting her definition of happiness and fulfillment. She never had children, a choice she has reflected on with clarity and calm. In a world that so often measures a woman's worth by motherhood, Linda quietly refused to let others define her life. She chose instead to pour her love into meaningful relationships, into her work, into her inner life. Not from lack, but from fullness on her own terms. By the mid-1990s, her public reflections struck a deep chord with women who had spent their lives believing that love must be earned through silence and sacrifice. It took me years to understand that I was enough, she said, her voice steady with a truth forged over time. That being loved should never cost you the loss of who you are. Her fragility became her strength. Her sorrow became a map for those still lost. In 2011, her memoir pulled back the curtain on a life woven not only from red carpets, but from private reckonings, nights of doubt, painful endings, and the slow journey of rebuilding self-worth. And through every love that ended, every hope quietly reborn, Linda Evans made the same choice again and again. She did not close her heart. She remained open. She remained kind. And after a lifetime spent learning not to disappear, she remained astonishingly, resiliently whole. For a brief, fragile stretch of time, Linda Evans believed she had finally arrived at something resembling peace. Love no longer demanded disappearance. Life had slowed. The noise had softened. After decades of storms, her days held a rare stillness. Quiet mornings, gentle routines. The long-awaited feeling that survival had finally given way to living. She was no longer fighting for worth, no longer bracing for impact. And yet, as she would soon learn, even the most carefully claimed peace offers no shield against the body's betrayals. Just when she allowed herself to rest, when her heart was open and her spirit finally unclenched, life demanded one final, merciless lesson. Around 2014, long after the applause had faded and the world had learned to leave her alone, Linda entered a chapter no role, no script, no amount of experience could have prepared her for. This was no longer a story of love, fame, or survival in the public eye. It was a ruthless confrontation with her own body. A dull ache began to surface in her back, subtle at first, almost ignorable, then persistent, then unrelenting. Doctors would later confirm multiple herniated discs in her spine, turning pain into a constant, uninvited presence. Every step carried a cost. Every breath demanded negotiation. To make it through each day, she relied on powerful prescription painkillers, medications that dulled the body while quietly eroding the spirit, pulling her into a fog where joy became unreachable, and even the memory of who she once was began to fade. For a woman who had spent decades learning to remain whole despite heartbreak, this was a cruel, uncharted storm, and it would test the limits of her resilience like never before. But physical pain was only part of the unraveling. She was later diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, an invisible yet merciless illness that drained her vitality so completely that even brushing her teeth could feel insurmountable. This was not exhaustion, it was erasure. Days and nights melted into one another, as the woman once synonymous with strength and grace lived a silent war against a body that no longer obeyed her. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Linda pushed herself through intense workouts, only to suffer a serious neck injury that compounded the damage. "There were days I couldn't get out of bed," she later recalled. "The thought that this could last forever, it was terrifying." The silence of her home, once a sanctuary, became suffocating. With no cameras, no scripts, no roles to hide behind, depression crept in like a cold fog. Then one day, her body simply gave out. Linda collapsed outside her home, crumpling onto the cold gravel, not only from pain, but from total physical and emotional depletion. In that moment, what terrified her most was not death, but the possibility that this half-life, an endless cycle of enduring without living, might be all the future had left to offer. She later admitted she had considered ending everything, not because she lacked courage, but because she had been brave for far too long. "I wasn't living," she said quietly. "I was just existing, and I didn't know how much longer I could endure." There is no weakness in that truth, only the bare honesty of someone pushed to the final edge. Linda Evans did not stand at the brink because she was fragile. She stood there because she had fought relentlessly, alone and in silence. And it was there, at the very bottom, stripped of illusion, that her true journey began. Not back toward the spotlight, but toward reclaiming the right to live on her own terms. Now, at age 82, Linda Evans stands where few ever arrive, not at the height of fame, but at the height of self-mastery. With an estimated net worth exceeding $20 million, wealth is undeniable. Yet extravagance is nowhere to be found. This fortune was not inherited, cushioned, or quietly protected. It was earned inch by inch through decades marked by ambition, heartbreak, withdrawal, return, and survival. Instead of converting success into spectacle, Linda Evans transformed it into something far rarer: sovereignty. Hollywood was left behind by choice, not exile, in exchange for a life anchored in silence. In the highlands of Washington state, a secluded vintage-style villa rests within nearly 70 acres of forest, hidden from roads, headlines, and expectation. The estate is expansive yet restrained. No grand gates, no performance of luxury. Sunlight spills through floor-to-ceiling windows. Towering evergreens stand guard like witnesses rather than admirers. This is not a monument to fame. It is the architecture of peace. Every acre tells the same story. A life once lived under relentless observation, now claimed fully, deliberately, and without apology. Her days now move with intention, not urgency. The body still bears the record of survival: herniated discs, chronic fatigue, lingering injuries. But every movement is chosen, measured, and honored. Mornings arrive without performance. Herbal tea, quiet meditation, gentle yoga, long pauses spent facing trees instead of mirrors. Food became medicine, then ritual. Clean meals, slow soups, healing juices. Each one a quiet declaration that survival deserved care. In 2011, that philosophy took form in Recipes for Life, a deeply personal cookbook where nourishment met memory and healing became language. "Every dish reminds me I'm still here," she wrote, words shaped by endurance, not trend. And from that same season of wholeness, she allowed herself one final return to the screen, a brief appearance in Swan Song, not as a comeback, but as a closing note. Proof that true talent, like resilience, does not fade with time. It deepens. Identity no longer rests on Krystle Carrington or the glamour of a vanished era. What remains is rarer: rebirth without bitterness, strength without spectacle, success without self-betrayal. Life is quiet but not empty. Sister Kathy and nieces visit often, filling the home with warmth. There were no children, a choice carried without regret. "Nothing felt missing," she once said. Love was poured into work, friendships, and the life that had to be fought for. Finances remained private, legacy unannounced, yet unmistakable, not measured by what was accumulated, but by what was preserved: integrity, intention, and a quiet, enduring impact. Over the years, Linda has quietly donated an estimated $7 million to causes shaped by her own survival, supporting chronic illness research, women's mental health initiatives, animal welfare, and environmental conservation, most of it given without press releases, fundraisers, or her name attached. Linda no longer seeks attention, but her voice still resonates. Through shared reflections, she speaks not as a celebrity, but as a witness, someone who has known erasure and chosen presence. In a gentle message shared in early 2025, hands clasped in prayer, she wished not for achievement, but awakening. "May this be the year you discover the beauty and wonder of your true self." It resonated because it came from lived truth. If her journey has ever steadied you, if her quiet resilience has helped you survive your own storms, leave her a message below. Share this story with someone who needs proof that it's possible to lose everything and still arrive whole. And carry this with you: the truest form of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you no longer need to prove.